In this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, it should be a fun one because we're going to talk about BYU and Baylor, but we have a different twist to it. Krysten Peek was live in attendance, so she's going to share her thoughts on Egor Demin, VJ Edgecombe, Kanon Catchings, but we're also going to talk about the McDonald's class. The names were just released a couple days ago, so I want to hear Krysten's thoughts on that. Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I am your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Krysten Peek. And like I said, today we're going to talk about the live scouting that she did at the BYU and Baylor game. Big shout out to Krysten because she made the long drive to be there in attendance so she can give us her live scouting thoughts. But before we get into this episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Also, check out the Locked On newsletter because your favorite Locked On NBA podcast has a newsletter covering your favorite team. It is a one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every single day. And if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel for the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, please subscribe, like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode. All right, let's get right into it. Fresh off the road, back from Provo.
Yep.
First of all, how was the atmosphere? Forget the players, forget the game. How was the atmosphere? On TV, it looked incredible.
It is insane. Any game at BYU that I've been to the last couple of years, whether they're playing Baylor or they're playing, whoever, the students pack the student section when it's the second half and the opposing team is shooting free throws right in front of the student section. They have, those like windy guys. They blow them up. They're blue, of course, because for BYU blue or whatever. And everybody is in white. They all know the same chants. They all do this thing like there was a player that fouled out last night. I think it was Norchad. Norchad fell off and they do that left, right, as he's walking off. And then everyone goes, sit, it is crazy. And it made me think, I'm like, man, wait till AJ DeBonsa gets here. Like this place is going to be insane. So this was obviously a huge game for both teams. They came in with the same record, 13-6, and kind of the middle of the pack in the Big 12. And so there was a lot on the line. It was a night game. Conor McGregor was there for whatever reason. I know. And then somebody told me why he was there. Obviously he was he went to the Milwaukee Bucks Jazz game on Monday night. And then he has a gym about 20 minutes away from Provo. So he made the trip for the game, was sitting courtside. And after the game, Kevin Young, the head coach for BYU, said, it's kind of a full circle moment for me. My first coaching job ever was in Ireland. So to look across and be like, Conor McGregor, what is he doing here? So he was there. There were also 32 scouts from 16 different teams. I want to say the entire Jazz front office was there. Of course, Danny Ainge has his season tickets. He was there, but there were so many other scouts that made the trip. And all the freshmen, Rafael, that they came to see played excellent. And so it was just start to finish, other than the weather, and it was freezing cold, start to finish, it was an amazing game. And I'm so happy I went.
Yeah, I was able to watch the game, and it just looked like it was a fun game to be at. I mean, it was fun for me to watch. And like you said, the freshmen came out, they put on a show. It's not often you get everybody shows up.
Correct.
And this is a game where, and I guess for me, because I have to do a podcast 5 days a week and I write about it so much, my opinions about players are up and down, up and down. You get to see like the fluidity of my thought process. If I only did a podcast once a month or wrote an article once a month, the things would be different. So, maybe a few weeks ago, I would have been like, VJ Edgecombe, not a lottery pick. He's not living up to the expectations. Okay, the season kicks in the conference play and he just can't miss from three. He's looking like the player that everyone thought was a top 5 pick. Egor got off to the hot start. And then he went ice cold, and he looked like it was best for him to possibly return from school. And now he's playing well now. So I wanted to hear your thoughts, and we'll start with Egor first, since BYU won.
Yep.
This was, to me, his best game since Thanksgiving, since before Thanksgiving. What did you see in person that caught your attention?
Well, I also saw him. I mean, I want to say he kind of started to pick things up Saturday night when Cincinnati played at BYU. I was also at that game where he had 15 points and 7 assists, and he kind of, started to backpack off that. In this Baylor game, he was way more confident, way more comfortable in the half court set. You hear NBA scouts, they're like, okay, how is he in the open court? How is he in the PNR? Yes, he has turnover issues, but I think that still has a lot to do with the spacing at the NBA or at the college level. And so for Egor to see, it kind of starting to come together, you're right. These past 2 games, the Cincinnati game and the Baylor game, were his best 2 games against good competition. Like you said, in the beginning of the season when they were playing nobody, of course he looked amazing and he looked like maybe a top 5 draft prospect. But with his size and his passing ability, it's no wonder why so many teams kind of see that spark and they see just the upside and the potential and the way that he sees the floor, and he just zips those passes. I mean, I know it's one thing to see it on film, but when you're sitting, where they put the media, which is up kind of right behind the first section, midcourt, and you see his floor vision and how he's able to zip those passes, that's the part that was most impressive to me. His 3-point jumper still isn't falling. Let's see what he was last night. I know it wasn't great. 1 for 5 from 3, 15 points, 6 assists, 4 turnovers for Egor, but still a lot to like. And it's good to see his game coming along.
I'm torn now because I was literally just on a radio station in Utah saying I think he should come back for another year. I think he should play with AJ.
Who else thinks that? Who else thinks that?
Who's that?
AJ himself. I saw him at Hoop Call and he goes, KP, you think Egor will come back? I was like, 0 chance, AJ. It's not happening. Anyways, continue.
There's 0 chance?
0 chance. 0 chance. If you are a projected, Rafael, if you are a projected lottery pick and you have the potential to make the NBA, why are you not taking that opportunity by the horns and going for it? There is no guarantee that you might tear your ACL. I mean, I never want to see that ever. But if he was like a potential, late first round, early second round, okay, wait to test the waters, test the But he's been a consistent projected lottery pick. 0 chance he's going back to school. That's my only hot take of this draft season.
I agree with you. My question is, was he a projected lottery pick before these last 2 games? I know for a while, the first month, yes. And then he had a stretch where he looked like, you know what, you're not creating, the shot isn't falling. And to me, like, his passing is enhanced when he's aggressive and when he's looking to score. When he's not aggressive and looking to score, then, the passing isn't, I mean, the vision is there, but you're not as much of a threat if you're not creating for yourself, which allows you to create for teammates. So I will say that these last 2 games in conference play have helped him, in my opinion. But if he would have struggled against Baylor and didn't have the strong game against Cincinnati, then I would question, is he a guaranteed lottery pick? But I think
that's fair. And I feel like you're in my perception and just thoughts on Egor as a prospect waver more throughout the season than NBA scouts and executives, because they understand, like, this is a process. Okay, yes, he started high, now he's low, or then he was low, now he's high again in mid-season or mid-conference play. We'll see how BYU finishes the season, and then it's okay, what is he going to do pre-draft? How are the workouts going to go? How is he? So it's like this, like, me and you might be like, oh, I don't know if he's a lottery pick, but I think like NBA teams are like, no, we see his upside and we're going to give him a little bit more grace until the other things fall into place. Like, how does he finish the season? What is he doing during pre-draft workouts? How does he look in terms of his body and his shooting, and how is that improving? And then they'll decide from there. But I definitely don't think he's coming back to BYU.
I don't think so now, but I mean, I think with NBA teams, they're always going to want guys to come out because they want a deeper draft pool.
Yeah,
For them,
right.
the more guys come out, the better. Whether or not it impacts the player or not, but long as, of course, the team would love for him to come out, because if you get him at 17 or 18, you might have a steal. But I always wonder, especially now with today's climate, if you're not a guaranteed lottery pick, you can probably make just as much money going back to school.
I
And
don't know
so,
how much money they have left if they're already paying AJ. Like,
hey,
so
I think they could come up with the money, especially if they figure we have both of them and maybe we're a national championship contender. they may
maybe.
be able to have a payroll like a EuroLeague team. So I think that could happen. All right, up next, we're going to talk about VJ Edgecombe, who has, I mean, I apologize to him in an episode earlier this week. I was down on him, but conference play, he just cannot miss. So we're going to talk about VJ Edgecombe. Before we get into the second segment, let's talk about game time, because attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings fans together. I remember going to a Cowboys game since I live in Dallas, and I mean, it wasn't a playoff game, but it was just a regular game. And of course, Cowboys games are always packed because the road fans are always coming in Dallas trying to take over the arena. And now, if you are looking for tickets to a game and they seem a little bit hard to get, check out the Game Time app, because Game Time now has a new feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out all the fluff and it shows you only the incredible deals to great seats, so you do not have to waste any more time searching through thousands of tickets. So you can now take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, second segment, VJ Edgecombe. He has been on an absolute tear since the start of conference play, or since the start of the new year. He had 28 points, 6 of 8 from 3, 9 of 15 from the floor. VJ Edgecombe, if you're listening, or if you're the family and friends of VJ Edgecombe, I apologize. I had him ranked outside of my lottery on my last, I don't know if it was my lottery or my last mock draft. Either way, I apologize. VJ is looking like the player that I was expecting him to be at the start of the season. And before we get into his play in the BYU game, in your opinion, do you think that part of his recent success is because Baylor has had some injuries and has put the ball in his hands a little bit more? Or do you think he's just figured it out? Because at the beginning of the year, he had some really brutal performances against
Yeah.
ranked teams.
Right. I think it's the latter. You know, this is someone that VJ Edgecombe, who was one of the biggest risers in the high school rankings, virtually went from a top 80 prospect to a top 10 prospect in a McDonald's All-American in the matter of a year. So he's still growing into himself. He's still growing into his game. And I talked to him after the Utah game Saturday afternoon, where, you know, he had a very good game there too. 21 points, 4 for 6 from 3-point range, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. And I asked him the same thing. I said, is this something where you're getting more touches and you're just getting more comfortable and confident, or are you just figuring things out? And he said, I'm getting more. He's like, it's a little bit of both. Like, I'm obviously I'm getting more comfortable with my teammates, but I'm also getting more confident in my shot and my shot creation. And that's exactly what we saw 3 days later against BYU, where you said he went 6 for 8 from 3-point range. And that has been his Achilles heel. Like, when you talk to NBA scouts, they're always like, oh, can he shoot? We know he's athletic. We know he can get downhill, but can he shoot? He is showing everyone that this is part of his game as well. And he's becoming a 3-way threat offensively. And you combine that with what he does defensively. Like, he was everywhere. He was everywhere defensively. And so, you know, when I'm looking at him and what I saw with my own eyes against first Utah on Saturday and then against BYU last night, He looks like a top 5 pick to me, top 5 or 6.
It's hard to disagree with that. I mean, in conference play, 18.6 points per game, but he's shooting like 48% from 3 on 5 attempts per game. He's at 46% from the floor, but yes, 48% from 3. He's getting to the foul line 4 times per game, making 86% of his free throws. Again, I apologize, but I still believe, this is just my opinion, no Langston Love and no
Jeremy Roach.
He is taken off. I think Langston Love has missed like the last 8 games. I wonder, not saying that it's going to impact his draft stock anymore. I think he's proven right now. But I wonder what happens when they return, because their best player has looked like their best player, and it seems like he was being held back, splitting reps or splitting ball handling duties with those guys.
I think there's 2 folds to this. They're only playing with 7 players, and that's not enough depth when you're playing with basically 4 out and 1 in, the way that they do, and they like to play fast. And I talked to Scott Drew walking to the bus after the Utah game, and he just said VJ is at his best when he's playing fast. So yes, when those 2 players come back, his offensive touches are going to be, he's going to have to share the ball a little bit more, share those offensive touches, but he is at his best when he's playing fast. And that's what those 2 guards bring. So I think now this has been really good for VJ. He's shown more confidence in his 3-point jumper, both off the dribble and in catch and shoot situations, but also, that Rob Wright can't do everything. He did everything in the 4th quarter or towards the end of the second half in last night's game. But I think it's going to be a little bit of both. It's going to help VJ, but also we're not going to see these 30-point, 28-point, 21-point games that we've seen in the last 3 games from him.
Yeah, the interesting dynamic is Baylor has lost 3 out of their last 5 games, and you can make a case and say that is the depth issues. I mean, they're really only playing 7 guys.
7. Yep.
VJ's draft stock, or his game has went to a new level due to their lack of depth, but they're not winning, and they're going to have to find a balance somehow. All right, let's switch to Robert Wright, a freshman that deserves a lot more love. And he was kind of like the forgotten guy in the whole Montverde crew of guys that, what was it? Cooper and Derek Queen, Asa Newell. What are your thoughts on Robert Wright, and what did you see from him?
I loved Robert Wright at Montverde, and he's a little bit of a smaller guard, and sometimes you don't know how that's going to equate or transfer or translate to the college level. Well, Rob Wright has had 0 problems, and we saw the preseason. He had bulked up a little bit and really taken his body seriously, adjusting to the physicality. He said that was something that he's really working on coming into this freshman year. But what he did against BYU last night in the last 4 minutes, he had all of their 14 final points. He basically by himself forced overtime against a BYU team that I think at one point was up by 14, 15 points. And Rob Wright is so tough. He is so good at finishing and drawing contact at the rim. You talk about these guards that can finish through contact, and they have that rim capability. Rob Wright was not only that, but he was shooting. I talked about that student section, Rafael. He was shooting those final free throws towards the student section, and he was perfect from the line. And so when you have that mental toughness and you're able to put your team basically on your back in those final minutes, that's something that, is probably very impressive to these NBA scouts, even though he's a little bit undersized as a guard. Seeing that mental toughness and seeing what he can do and how he can rise to the occasion in that sort of atmosphere. He was awesome.
22 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, 6 of 12 shooting for freshman Robert Wright from Baylor. All right. Up next, we got to talk about Kanon Catchings, who was perfect from the floor. I want to hear Krysten's thoughts on Kanon. I want to talk about Richie Saunders and also the McDonald's game. Who was left off the 2025 McDonald's game? Stay tuned. All right, last segment, Kanon Catchings. 23 points, 8 of 8 from the floor, 4 of 4 from 3. not just easy shots. I mean, he had like a difficult step back three. He was a player that, at one point I thought, okay, you see the size, the physical tools, the shooting, potential first round pick, kind of went cold, just had, your freshman ups and downs. And then in front of 30 something NBA scouts, a big game. I think this performance alone right here is probably going to get him drafted, because you saw all the flashes, all the potential, everything you want to see from him. You saw it all in one game, a perfect game at that.
It was unbelievable. And I said this, and, like I mentioned, there were 32 scouts there, right? And I asked Kevin Young, the head coach of BYU, after the game, I said, is this the game that you've been waiting for from Kanon Catchings? And he said, absolutely. We've seen his potential. We've seen what he's been able to do in practice. So for him to be able to put it together in a game like this, a big game like this, in a sold out crowd with what was on the line, he said, we couldn't have done it without him. And Scott Drew even said, leaving the press conference, it was him and VJ in the press conference, and he just said, hey, Kanon Catchings had a hell of a game. There was nothing we could do. So he deserved, make sure he gets an extra water or Gatorade. He played great. And when Kanon came in, he said he's never had a perfect game. I asked him, when did you know? Because shooters always know when you're going to have a game like that. And he said after that second three went in, it was a deep three, kind of with a tough closeout coming out. He said after that second three went in, he knew he was just going to be open. But he said, I've never had a perfect game. This is my first perfect game. His aunt was there, Tamika Catchings, who played in the WNBA. Also his mom, who was drafted to the WNBA. The two of them were there. And he said, anytime my aunt and my mother are at the game, I know I have to rise and try to perform the best of my ability. And that's what happened. There were questions as to why he didn't play the final minutes and he didn't play a single minute in overtime. And Kevin Young just said, we didn't like who he was matching up with defensively. And so that's why they kept him on the bench. They were more worried about trying to stop Rob Wright and what he was doing, penetrating the lane, than what Kanon was doing from behind the arc and scoring.
All right. Richie Saunders, who has had a strong season. He's only a junior. And so I wonder, and again, this is probably about to make people want to pull their hair out. I feel like, all right, in my perfect world, my perfect BYU world, Saunders comes back, Catchings comes back, Egor decides, I want to improve on something. You could have all of these guys back along with AJ. Well, let's talk about Richie. He's a junior. He has been probably BYU's most consistent player this season. I shouldn't say probably. I mean, I think it's fair to say.
He is, yeah.
What were your thoughts on seeing him in person over the last couple of games?
You are absolutely right. He has been their most consistent player. He's struggled. We saw him struggle for the first time from behind the arc last night, where he went 0 for 4 from 3-point range. He didn't have a good first half. He kind of switched gears in the second half, made some mental errors. He also fouled out. He had 5 fouls, but he's so aggressive, Rafael. He's going after every 50-50 ball. He's rebounding at a high rate. If he's not rebounding, he's going in there and getting those tip rebounds, tipping to another teammate. He had 6 rebounds and 17 points. And was perfect from the line down the stretch, 5 for 5 from the free throw line. And so when you're looking for that glue guy, when NBA teams are looking at the back half of the second round, if they're looking for players to pick up that aren't undrafted, I think he's going to be someone that a lot of teams are kind of circling on their draft board. Like, okay, this is a guy, I don't know if he could help our NBA team right away, but he's definitely someone just as a junior, great size, positional size, plays his ass off. I'm sorry, but he does. He's so tough. And he's someone that a lot of teams are probably looking at saying, you know what? We could use a guy like that. We can develop him into something. He could fit well into our culture. And so, just a very, very consistent player. He was great for Cincinnati in the Cincinnati win, and has been very, very consistent all season.
Yeah, there's always going to be room in the NBA for shooting, wings that can shoot. And he's shooting 43% on 5 attempts per game. So he's definitely going to get a look. And it helps when you have a guy like Egor on your team that's going to draw a bunch of NBA scouts at every game that, you can catch some people by surprise.
Right.
Let's switch it up. The McDonald's game. You were traveling. So we weren't able to get this episode out as soon as the rosters were released. The West team looks absolutely loaded. Like, do you think the East has a chance?
I don't know. You never know how these players are going to come out and play in the actual game. I think what we'll see the real competition and real colors come through is always in the practices, because remember, that's where the NBA and executives, they always go to the 2 days of practices and then they go to the scrimmage. The scrimmage is on ESPN. I think it's the day or 2 days before before the actual McDonald's All-American game. But yeah, the West team is stacked. Come on. I mean, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, the West team has Elijah Arenas, Michael Brown Jr., you have AJ DeBant. So you have AJ, Malik Thomas, Darren Peterson, Koa Pete, all on the same
Chris
team.
Sinak, Braden Burries, come on.
Caleb Wilson.
What are we doing here? Yeah.
Now the East team, you have the Boozer twins. You got Nate Ament, Rashad Bev. Yes, you have him. I mean, you got some. There's some solid players on there, but it just seems like it is just totally loaded for the West. But everybody's expecting the West to win, so maybe it's going to bring a little bit more out of the East, and maybe we'll have a competitive game. But if it's not competitive, I don't think anybody would be surprised. But let's talk about the snubs. There's been quite a few guys that it happens every year. If I'm not mistaken, Jared McCain was a snub a couple years ago.
No, Jared was on the team. It was Asa Newell didn't make the team last year. Obviously, Jeremiah Fears didn't make the team. He didn't make that or Hoop Summit. And these are two players that are now projected, lottery pick and definitely first round. So what I want to say to anybody listening, McDonald's All-American does not equal NBA. Nike Hoop Summit does not equal NBA. Okay. Yes, these are great honors and these are great benchmark events for NBA scouts and executives to go and see these players and see what they're going to possibly be a year from now. But it does not mean that you are going to be drafted to an NBA team. So for all of these players that we're going to talk about right now that are snubs, like they are still NBA prospects a year from now, I think.
There was somebody, I want to say it was 2 years ago, 2023, that was a snub. It'll probably come to me after we're done. But who are some of the snubs? And I thought it was Jared McCain, but I just looked it up. He did make it.
Yeah, he was on the team.
Snubs from this 2025 game that just caught you were just surprised that they didn't make it?
It has to be Shelton Henderson. He's, I think, the only 5-star that didn't make it. But as we talked about it with Nike Hoop Summit and Darren Peterson not making that roster and the politics that go with that, I think there's a little bit of this with the Adidas run McDonald's All-American game. Shelton Henderson, of course, going to Duke. They already have 3 players that have made the game. I'm pretty sure they didn't want to make it like a complete Duke roster. He also played in the Nike EYBL for a JL3 Elite. And when you look at, I saw this graphic that Duke posted. This is just ridiculous. The most consecutive years with only one McDonald's All-American, right? 41 consecutive years that Duke has had at least one McDonald's All-American. Most consecutive years with 2 or more McDonald's All-American, 15 consecutive years. So when the committee is looking at like, oh, okay, well, we can't obviously put the entire Duke class in there. And they look at the votes. I think Shelton got the bad end of the stick there, but we'll see him at Nike Hoop Summit. But he was a massive snub. Jasper Johnson, who plays for Adidas Run Overtime Elite, heading to Kentucky next year, he was a snub. And I think that was more the fact that like he hasn't really performed at a massively higher rate at OTE. Malik Thomas, who made the game, who also plays at OTE, who's heading to Arkansas, he got the nod as a McDonald's All-American. And for Jasper, I think it was probably he just didn't get enough votes for the specific position that they were voting for. So those two, and then everyone's wondering why Kiyan Anthony was excluded. The reason why Kiyan Anthony was probably excluded, I don't think he qualified. You had to play a certain amount of games in your high school senior season to actually be considered. And he's been hurt. He was out for 5 or 6 weeks with a back, lower leg, or like whatever injury he had. So I don't think he qualified. So those are the 3 players that I think everybody was most surprised about.
All right. Who are the biggest surprises that made the team?
Well, Sean Abayev, who's headed to Cincinnati, he played on the Under Armour circuit, lefty, scorer. Like you said, he's originally from Israel. I think a lot of people were like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Reba, who's headed to UConn. He hasn't necessarily been playing that great. I've called a couple of his games. So I think a lot of people were kind of shocked that he made it. He's also ranked outside of the top 25. He's ranked number 31. And the biggest shock, I think, is Nico Bandalo, who plays at Prolific Prep. Remember, again, an Adidas-run prep school program, headed to Washington, but he's ranked number 38 in the class, according to 24/7 Sports, who I think does the best high school rankings. So those were the three where I'm like, okay, all right. Politics, be whatever, but
yeah, because you figure
it's still going to be a good game. Yeah.
If you're ranked number 38, you're now one of the top 24 guys. And if you just go by the top 24, and of course you got to make the rosters balanced out on size. You can't have all guards and so on. But yeah, I just wanted to hear your thoughts because very few people know this high school class like you do. So just wanted to, again, hear your thoughts on who are the biggest surprises and snubs. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Once again, thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Also, check out the Locked On newsletter at lockedondaily.com. Once again, it's Rafael and Krysten Peek, and we are out of here.